Hello, today is June 4th, 2025, and I'm going to give a little talk about my life. I was born in Lanesboro, Minnesota, a beautiful little town, a very little town, and I went to school on the hill in Lanesboro. And I had a very, very nice childhood. My parents both lived in this little town, and my dad worked at the bank, and eventually he met my mom, and then they had me on March 11, 1937. So I am of a ripe old age right now. and I had a lot of cousins in town, and everybody knew everyone. So that's how they met. And then in the Depression, the bank in Canton, Minnesota, which was about 20 miles away, had closed, like many banks had, and some people from Canton wanted to open a bank again, so they recruited my dad and mom, who had worked in the bank in Lanesboro, to go to Canton. And there, my dad eventually bought a small little hobby farm, which I was able to grow up and experiencing that. And I had two younger brothers, Paul, who was 3 years younger, and Michael, who was 9 years younger. And I was lucky. My dad had horses that I loved and enjoyed going on trail rides and everything. When I grew up, I wanted to be a cowgirl. Which was kind of unrealistic. But anyway, it was a good life in Canton. I was able to teach the little calves how to drink out of a pail for their milk. And I could put my hand down in the pail of milk and have them suck my fingers. So that's how they learned how to do that. And they had, my dad also at one time had sheep. So I was able to experience that too, the beautiful little lambs that, with joy every spring when they were just little lambs, they'd jump up on all 4 feet with just pure joy. And my mom had chickens for a while until the critters around there kind of killed a chicken every night, so we got up to a dead chicken every morning, and finally she gave that up. But and she worked in the bank too with my dad, and they started the bank in Canton, and it was a good life, okay? And it was so small that everybody knew everybody, you know. And then well, I enjoyed working on the farm a lot, you know, cleaning out the barn, and in the summer toting bales. So I was really strong in those days. This was even a smaller town than Lanesboro was. When I grew up there, there was about 500 people living there, and today I think there's about 350. Most people moved away, but I still have friends back there, and I like to go back there at least once a year. up there, there was 18 kids in my graduation class, so you can hear that it's very, very small. And when I graduated from high school, I enrolled to the College of St. Teresa in Winona, Minnesota, which was about 50 miles away. And there I enjoyed that too. St. Teresa's. That was very nice, and it was fairly close to home. And there was one day that my little brother, Michael, he needed to have a chaperone on a class trip that he was taking. And so I volunteered. I was home that weekend. And while I was gone during the day, a young man from the next little town by the name of Harmony called up, and he asked my mother to speak to me, and my mother told him that I was on a class trip with my little brother, and I was gone for the day. And he said, "Would you please have her call me when she gets home?" And my mother was enchanted with his voice because he was from Germany and she had heard about him. So she was she wanted me to call him. But when I came home, she told me about it, and I said, "I'm not going to do that," because in those days a girl just didn't call a boy, it just that wasn't me. But she kept at me, so I finally called him. And I said, well, I was going to be going back to St. Teresa's the next day. And he said, well, could I come over tomorrow afternoon and meet you? Because we'd never met. And I said, well, I suppose you could come over. So he came over, and he met my family. And of course, they were enchanted with him, that he was from Germany, and he had this beautiful accent. And I went out to the kitchen for something, and my little brother, who never liked anybody I went with, he said, "Denise, I like him." And then later on, after we had visited for a while, my dad said, well, I have to bring Denise back over to Winona, so we'd better close this up now. And Dieter said, well, I'd be happy to bring her back. And my dad said, okay, because that left him free to do whatever he wanted. So Dieter gave me a ride back to St. Teresa's, and on the way, he stopped at a farmhouse and picked some lilacs to give me a bouquet. And when we got back to St. Teresa's, there was a curfew at 10 o'clock, and we got back there before 10. And he asked the Mother Superior if Denise could stay out maybe just a little bit longer, maybe an hour, and she said yes. So anyway, that's how I met Dieter, and a year later he was drafted into the U.S. Army, and he had signed a paper that he'd be willing to serve Uncle Sam if called. Well, they called him, and he told me about that, and we were engaged at the time. But anyway, he thought he would probably be stationed in Japan or wherever, but He'd never dreamed that he'd be in Germany, but he called me and said, I've got orders for Germany. Why don't we get married and you come over here and you can meet my family and I can show you my country. And I said yes. So I did. I went to Germany. Salary, which was $95 a month. And he brought me sea rations home so I'd have something to eat. But we did go out to dinner every weekend because the dollar was worth more than the mark. So you get 4.25 marks for $1. So we could go out to eat for a very nice meal in this little town. Think of that. We could have a beautiful meal. I loved German cooking. I loved it. And bakery there was fantastic. And a beverage, a lovely dessert for $1.25. So that was very good. Anyway, I know how to live on little. So I know that, but not as bad as it is today over in Ukraine and Gaza. My heart goes out to all of those people. Just growing up in Minnesota was wonderful. It was a wholesome, I always call it the golden age, kind of a golden age. It was wonderful growing up in Lanesboro and then in Canton, and then going to St. Teresa's and meeting Dieter was a big moment in my life. It really was. He found out who I was because it's small towns, small towns. And when he told his American mother, the people that brought him to America, and he described me, I guess it was, and she said, "Oh, that sounds like Denise Galligan." I wanted to tell you about my ancestors too. They came, the Galligans came to, they came to Canada actually during the potato famine, and it was in County Limerick, or the city of Limerick actually, and then my mother's parents, they came from, I can't remember, and they came later, not during the potato famine, but it was Limerick, County Cork, and I can't remember the other one, but that was on the other side of Ireland. Mm-hmm. Ireland's not very big. So anyway, all of my relatives came from Ireland. All of my ancestors. And we did the Ancestry.com, Dieter did and I did, and it turns out that I am 100% Irish. And in Ireland there's lots of stones, so they were very good stone masons. They built the dam in Lanesborough that still stands today. It still stands today. And they also, Dennis Galligan, who I am named after, he built the first large brick building on Main Street, and it says Dennis, or D. Galligan, 1865, in Lanesborough, Minnesota. And an old timer that I talked to that knows everything about Lanesborough, I thought Dennis Galligan had only built the one brick building, but he told me, he said, Denise, every brick building on Main Street here was built by your great-grandfather. So I was happy to know that. And then when the railroad was coming from the west here, and it was coming from the east, when they met in the Rockies, they were having big problems meeting each other. And they recruited Jim Hill, who was a big railroad builder in Minnesota. They recruited him, and he recruited my great-grandfather and my grandfather, his son, and his two other sons to come with him to help Jim Hill. And the way I had seen it written up was, I thought it was my great-grandfather, my grandfather, and these people, but Dieter and I stopped at that area when we were coming out on Amtrak one time, and we went to see it, and we saw where they camped during that time, and there was a big oven where they did their things, and we found out that it was them, they were the ones that started it, but there were a lot of Chinese that were coming from the west that helped also, and a big railroader. I can't remember his name, but he was a big railroad builder, and he recruited a lot of Chinese people. Dieter and I were blessed with 4 children. Our oldest is Patty, and the second one was Michael, and he's living in Minnesota now at our old farm place, so I can go back there and visit. We all can go back and visit. And then Mary came along, and she lives here in Stillicum, and Mark, who lives in in Santa Ana, California. And they're all wonderful. And I feel like we were very blessed to have these wonderful children. Okay. And I've got to tell you this too. Before we left, we had just gotten our first computer, and the person who had sold it to us said, "Now put it in your trunk. I think it'll be safer there rather than a moving van." So we put the computer in the trunk for a safer ride, and it was the wildest drive that anybody could possibly ever have. Escape death. And the computer was fine. Even after that rough ride, finally to a stop. Mm-hmm. So I feel like I have been blessed, truly. I used to like to cook, but I don't anymore. I had 4 children. I had to cook, and I'd like to try. And I loved German cooking, so I did quite a bit of German cooking because that's what Dieter liked. And my kids did too, and I did too. So, but not anymore. It's too hard to go shopping and everything. I like going to the community center, meeting new people all the time. And that's nice. And I've met people from all over, from Germany, from China, Taiwan, Italy, Greece. I've met a lot of people from all over. And I was never the one to meet people real easily, because I was from a small town and all that, and had never really traveled a whole lot, but more than a lot of my fellow classmates. Some of them had hardly been out of the near vicinity. Mm-hmm. So we did travel more than that, but I like to meet new people now. It has broadened my horizons. But they started to broaden as soon as I met Dieter. I started to meet new people because it was very easy for him to meet new people. And now I'm doing pretty good too, meeting new people. So, and this is I'm comfortable here in my little condo. It's very comfortable for me. So. And I still do have, I went on a trip by myself, but a bus trip, a bus trip, so it was with a group, but a small group this time. Saw the red rocks of southern Utah, and we came all across Utah and Idaho, up Idaho, and then over to Oregon and home. So, and I did that all by myself. It was a last minute thing. So I didn't ask anybody else. I just met all new people, but there weren't many because it was a repositioning thing. We flew to Las Vegas, and then the bus picked us up, and then we went through this beautiful area, fairly close, And I go back to Minnesota at least once a year, sometimes twice. And that's a long way for me. But I'm not just sitting at home all the time. But I've got to be more careful because I don't want to really break a leg. I'm all black and blue here. So that was okay. I got through it. I was blessed once more. So.
Today is Sunday, May 30th, 2010. I'm interviewing my grandfather, Dieter Ilmaka, here in Steilacoom, Washington, about his experiences during the war.
Okay, I was born May 13th, 1933, in Breslau, Germany, in the state of Silesia. Silesia was the easternmost German state bordering on Poland. It is now, after the Second World War, when the Big Four divided Germany, it is now Poland, specifically. I lived